we're increasingly being asked to do, but it is also worth acknowledging we are coming off a period where we have been asked, probably over the last 15, 18 years, to sweat the state highway asset, to manage it to a lower condition in order to save money. And we are now embarking on the process of investing more into that asset to raise its condition score back up, to make sure that it's doing the job that New Zealanders can expect of it. That, at the same time, we're asking local government to do the same. And I know that puts pressure on your balance sheet. The last role on the slide before I move on is not a statutory role, but it is one that we want to make sure that we're focusing on. And that is recognising that we, on a daily basis, serve a very large number of customers, either in a transactional relationship, for example, when you go to get your driver's licence renewed or get your car registered or get a warrant of fitness, or frankly, you are just driving on the state highway and you are trying to undertake your daily business. That can and should be seen in some ways by us as a customer relationship. You ought to have an expectation of service from us, and we need to be clearer about what, as a customer, you can and should expect from us. For example, the electricity industry does a really good job of communicating the sort of standards that people should expect from it, the likely disruption, how long it should last for, how regular they should be. That is hard to do in our sector, but it is something we're increasingly interested in exploring, because disruption on the state highway costs everyone an awful lot of money, and it is very difficult to cope with if you don't understand how and when and what your expectations should be. I mentioned the regulatory role. I just wanted to dig into it just a little bit more deeply. These are the sort of the 6 areas in which we break the regulatory system up. Obviously, we do drivers, entry and ultimately exit from the system in terms of lawful driving. We regulate vehicles and their entry into the system and their condition while they're in the system. We regulate commercial transport somewhat separately, or think of it somewhat separately, because it's a fairly important and vital activity. We are New Zealand's rail safety regulator, not from a workplace health and safety point of view, that is WorkSafe, but if you are undertaking, if you're driving a train on the New Zealand network, we are your regulator in terms of safe conduct. And that's everything from KiwiRail at the very big size to small tourist trains. And we are also the right port of call in an initial example for anyone interested in getting into the rail network. We collect the revenue, and importantly, and I will come back to it, we don't set the revenue within the land transport system. So the amount of tax that is paid, whether that's by way of fuel excise duty on petrol or road user charges, that is not set by us, that is set by statute, so it's within the control of ministers and Parliament, but we do collect it. And fuel excise duty is probably New Zealand's most efficient tax, in the sense that it really only requires us to send a bill to 4 businesses. It's a very, very efficient way of collecting revenue. But that being divorced from setting the revenue sets us up for a challenge that I will come back to in terms of the challenges that we're facing in the land transport system in terms of having enough money in the system. Lastly, we regulate the road network, and that includes regulating ourselves as a road controlling authority with regard to the state highway, just as we regulate you as a road controlling authority for the local network around core. So things like speed, that's all run through that road network regulatory lens. Just briefly on our legislation, because it's important to know where you stand with regard to us. We are established under the Land Transport Management Act. It is getting old, as I say, it's 2003. It's been substantially updated. Probably the biggest update, though, is also getting quite old. It was 2008, which created the single agency, New Zealand Transport Agency. But the most important thing to understand from a legislative point of view is we are a Crown entity. We're not a government department. And as a Crown entity, we are a Crown agent, which is to say we are the least independent of the range of Crown entities. So we have some statutory independence. Our board is asked to and required to make independent investment decisions. So ministers are not allowed to tell us what to invest in unless they give us the money to invest at the same time. But that investment decision, independently made, must be made to give effect to Crown policy. So we aren't independent like the Commerce Commission is independent. We don't have a judicial function like that. That sits very arm's length from the Crown. We are as close to the Crown as you get without being effectively a government department. And that means when you come to me or come to us asking for something, very often my answer is, I'm afraid that doesn't fit with government policy. You're going to have to raise that with the Minister. And very often to the Minister, it's, Minister, do you want to change government policy? Because in order to get what he wants, you have to give a very formal public signal to us that that policy position has changed. And I'll talk about that cycle in a second because it's really, really important for local government to understand. So the most regular and most important expression of government policy is the picture on the screen or the document that I've got in my hand, which is the Government Policy Statement on Land Transport. So it is a 10-year statement of government policy, but it is effectively updated every 3 years. So really, just as we experience a lot in local government and land transport, it's a 3-year document. The current one that I've got in my hand was issued in 2004. It was written by the then Minister of Transport, Simeon Brown. The next version is being written right now by the current Minister of Transport, Chris Bishop. And I would expect, maybe hope, that you would see a draft version of that government policy statement middle of this year. It will need to be in place, that is to say, it will need to have gone through formal consultation and have been settled by about this time next year in order for it to inform the parts of the planning cycle that I'm about to talk about. But it is the place where the Crown directs us where to spend and how to spend. And it is also the bit that impacts on how much money is available for us to subsidise local government's activities. It is worth saying that whilst I expect a draft to come from the Minister middle of the year, it's fairly obvious that there is an election towards the end of the year, and if we follow the same cycle that we did last time round, no matter what the draft says to the middle of the year, there will be some form of update, some form of addition, some form of change post-election in order to then settle it down by this time next year. So multiple opportunities to input into that by way of consultation with the ministry and engagement with politicians, but we will need a settled policy by, as I say, by this time next year. Turning to revenue very briefly, I mentioned the revenue we collect in terms of fuel excise duty, road user charges. Small amount of money from motor vehicle registrations pours into what we call the National Land Transport Fund. Tolling revenue for the toll roads that we operate, once we've taken out the costs of literally collecting the toll, comes in, and there are a few other rats and mice, but the big forms of revenue really are the top two, fuel excise duty and road user charges. But it is worth saying that for the last few years, certainly the last 6 years, probably even the last 10, Crown borrowing and Crown loans are increasingly making up a proportion of our revenue base. And that doesn't come without tags, without constraint, without costs. Crown borrowing, Crown loans to us need to be repaid back. So it's a great way to move cash forward and to pay for projects now, but it impacts the ability of the fund later to pay for things because we have to pay that money back. And the terms on those loans are usually in the 10 to 12 year range. Crown appropriations, they don't have to be paid back. That is just the Crown or the ministers reaching into the General Consolidated Fund, taxpayers' money, and handing that over to us to top up the fund. But it comes with trade-offs elsewhere because that money can't be spent elsewhere. And it also, as I say, comes with tags. Ministers usually are able to say, great, well, if we're giving you an appropriation, it's going to be spent on this exact thing. They reach past the board's independence in that way and say, great, I'm buying this particular piece of the transport system. And given that those two things, the borrowing and the appropriations, are making up an increasing proportion of our revenue, it's not fair to point out, we are seeing ministers more and more reach into the transport system and direct what the money is spent on. And that's fairly understandable.
So, the Crown Appropriation Fund and the Crown borrowing, previously the NLTF was hypothecated. fuel excise and the road user charge actually funded the whole thing. And so that was really tidy because it did keep these unusual decisions out of it a bit. And so we could work with the GPS to give effect to the GPS, which was again given to us by the Minister or the MOT. But this does muddy the waters quite a bit, and it just makes it much more difficult because you get decisions on hire that may not be what we would support or even would be supported through the GPS, but because of the funding source, they are tagged to do that.
A different way of saying that, so simply a system that was designed almost entirely to be funded by way of revenue collection from fuel or activity on the road simply isn't able to keep up with the demand. You could bring it back into line there, but that would take a decision from ministers to significantly raise fuel taxes. And there's been quite a lot said about that in the last couple of weeks, and I think we're very clear that isn't likely to be on the cards. So just coming to how that is done, because it's really important you understand how much this can change. The GPS that I mentioned earlier sets out these buckets. These are the activity classes, the spending areas from the current government policy statement. So the Minister has decided these are the areas in which the money should be divided. And what the Minister does is sets for our board a minimum level of investment in each of those areas and a maximum level of investment in each of those areas. And then it's up to our board to balance it all through the 3-year cycle. But these change, and they did change last time round. The Minister last time round became the Minister of Transport, very clear that there hadn't been enough investment either in the state highway area or the local roading area on preventing potholes, and so broke some of those areas up in the past and created, specifically, you can see them on the top line, a state highway pothole prevention activity class and a corresponding one for local roads, a local road pothole prevention activity class, requiring a level of money to be spent on pavement. Money in those two areas can only be spent on resealing the road, rehabilitating the road, or drainage works. And it is a way of the Minister saying, great, I will have this amount of investment in this outcome, and it guarantees it. And that required us and local government to lift our investment in pavement quality over the last 3 years. And certainly from our point of view, it's leading to the beginning of what will be a long, probably a 10-year program to increase the quality of the state highway, but it is improving the quality of the state highway. So it's having exactly the outcome that the minister asked for. Different minister might choose to do a different thing. Another thing the Minister did last time round is what used to be a very large, relatively large safety activity, you can see it in the middle of the bottom line, moved a lot of the money for infrastructure for safety out of that activity and put it back into the two improvement activities, one for state highway and one for local roads. And so that safety activity class now only really pays for the money that we pay to the New Zealand Police for road policing, which is the largest interdepartmental transfer within the Crown. And it pays for the advertising that you see on TV, whether drink driving or road safety advertising. So now if you are bidding or you desire to spend money on road safety improvements, for infrastructure for road safety improvements, say to upgrade a roundabout or to put in an intersection upgrade or roadside barriers or anything like that, you have to compete against other projects in a general activity class that is also funding projects that might ease traffic congestion or open up access to housing. It is no longer confined into an activity class that is specifically dedicated to improving road safety. Again, an explicit choice by the Minister, very clear that is what he wanted to do. The swing from the GPS before the one we've got now to the current one was quite strong. The subsidy, the amount of money available for walking and cycling, for example, was greatly constrained by the current Minister. Absolutely his right, and I'm only raising it simply to paint a picture about how much these things can swing and change. And so when I say the Minister is issuing a draft middle of the year, you will absolutely, as local government, want to look at it and understand its impact on your program. on your ambitions for your community, because it will fundamentally constrain where we can invest money.
Can I ask a question?
Of course you can.
Just on the, so if we use an example, say the crossing at Matoda.
Yes, perfect example. I knew we'd get there. I'm so pleased we got there so easily.
What activity class would that fall under? Is it across several different?
It's actually it's a perfect example, because it would have and did, 3 years ago, fit in the safety activity class, because it was a safety upgrade of the state highway. Right? We could bid within that against other safety programs, and as one of the most dangerous level crossings in the country, it was not looking bad. It was looking expensive, but in and of itself wasn't hard to compete against. It now has to compete in the state highway improvements activity class, and I'm very glad we got there. Actually, well done. And that activity class comes with even more constraint by way of the GPS, because the Minister said quite explicitly, your number one priority, NZTA and state highway improvements, is making progress on the 17 roads of national significance. Right? These are the roads I want you to focus on. Make all due haste on those, please. So there's a lot of money in that state highway improvements activity class for 3 years, $7 billion, quite generous, but it is prioritised towards projects that aren't a level crossing in Matoda. Now, look, if I just briefly divert onto that one, just so that I close it off, because I know you'll want to know. So the long story of that, because community's been very clear about how important an upgrade on that level crossing has been, is last funding round, when it was in that state highway improvements activity class, we were early in design. We thought we could effectively pay for it and fund it through low cost, low risk, which is an activity I will come to, but requires a whole lot less validation. It's a lot simpler to push a project through. When we designed it up, the cost was over that margin, so we had to go through more assurance to get there. We have the money for it ourselves this period, and the challenge now simply has been lining up our funding with KiwiRail's funding, because fairly obviously it requires investment from KiwiRail as well. That has been a challenge, because KiwiRail, one, have an awful lot they need to spend money on across the country, but two, like us, are directed to focus in particular places, and so have to find a way to work. My understanding is that we've resolved that. Now we are simply trying to deal with it. The next challenge, which is getting through the signals planning, the detailed signals planning in KiwiRail. So KiwiRail, it's a very specialised activity in KiwiRail, designing changes to signals. They have a very long list of sites which need upgrading, and we are simply trying to get Matoda further up that list so that we can move faster on it, because we need to get it done. That's the short story on Matoda. But thank you for raising, because that sort of change really does affect a project like that. It is also just worth calling out, we do allocate $1 billion to rail via this, but that is by no means the total funding for KiwiRail in terms of capital. It is a contribution from the land transport system into the much larger separate Crown appropriation that goes directly to KiwiRail. Yeah.
It was interesting, you're going on, you talk about roads of national significance.
Yeah.
Talk about
Good.
one, how many are in the South Island? I know one.
Two.
One Christchurch, one Queenstown.
Yep. No. One in Christchurch, one in Nelson.
That's right. There you go. And then I look at that funding, where you're funding from, road use charges, that's the classic.
Yep.
Now, I've heard, and I've never been proved wrong, that over a 10-year period, Southland produced probably nearly $1 billion worth of road use charges. We do not see anywhere near that amount of funding coming backward. And those roads of national significance generally sit around a very big population voting base. And it's very politically driven. And you talk about these new policies coming out, it'd be left or right, about which way, because this is where we sit here around here going, we struggle to find a contractor because there's only 3 to pick from.
Yep.
You get a very small amount of money to do a huge amount of roading, and I can sit and listen to you all day, but you're not actually going to answer our question.
Oh, I can try. Look, the very least I think I can do is explain to you how it works, so that you know where to influence or where to raise your concern.
Yeah.
Right. So, Matoda, absolutely, that's us, and you should be, and you are telling me very clearly we need to make progress on that, we absolutely do. If it's in the GPS, all I can say is it's in the GPS, my hands are tied, but at least that tells you where the point of influence is, right? So yes, there are 17 roads of national significance. 2 of them are in the South Island. 1 is just north of Christchurch. 1 is just outside of Nelson. If you want that list changed, that is a matter that you need to be raising with the minister. And as I say, he's writing a draft right now. You know, on road user charges and return to Southland, I've heard the same argument. I've seen the same numbers put forward. There's a caveat around the numbers, I would say, because at the moment, actually, the data is reasonably hard to interrogate. No one can easily tell where a vehicle, outside the person driving the vehicle, is driving. So you rely on where the road user charge is paid from, and that does somewhat distort the data. Richardson's Group pay all its road user charges here in Southland, whereas Fonterra pay all its road user charges in Hamilton. That doesn't mean they're driving all of their tankers in the Waikato, for example. But to the wider point about equity, again, that is a fair argument to raise with ministers for what you want to see in a government policy statement. I'll tell you now, there hasn't been a government policy statement that has ever said there should be regional equity, but it's perfectly possible, and it's absolutely an argument that you want to be raising if that's what you want with ministers, either before a draft is issued or in consultation once a draft is out for consultation. It's a perfectly reasonable argument to raise.
James. Going back to low cost, low risk.
Yeah.
Jason and I were in a meeting in Wellington last year about infrastructure. And Chris, the minister, brought up that there are councils out there that have not used their funding, and there's small change over like $10 to $13 million, which is a lot more than what we've asked.
Yep, absolutely.
We asked for $1 million and we might have got 300,000.
Yep. Yep.
Who do we talk to and how do we tap getting that other $10 million off the councils that haven't used it to fill our $1 million fund? Cool.
His name's Gordon. He's sitting right here. Look, let me just caveat that. I mean, it's a really good point. The fund is a cash fund, so it is live. When we approve a project, and I'll come to that in a second, but when we approve a project in the National Land Transport Program, it's the first stage, and a lot of projects that get approved for funding, you know, for all sorts of reasons, don't end up spending that money when we thought they'd spend that money, or they take longer, or priorities change in a community, or what have you. And so the money that you thought you had allocated, by the time you're at year 2 or even year 3, look, we're actively managing it, trying to move things around. And so it really is a good point. Sometimes spending slower, sometimes actually councils, others want to spend the money faster. It is always worth staying in touch with us, particularly if you think you're on the cusp of being funded, or it's just really important, the project that you've got for the local community. Because as we move through that 3-year cycle, and if there's willingness and ability and adaptability on local government's side, sometimes we can turn a no to a yes, and sometimes we can move things around because something else has happened or what have you. Just on low cost, low risk for a bit more, because I don't think I come to it later. We are doing our best to, we'll in due course, I'm not sure that the letter's gone out yet, but there'll be a letter to your chief executive very shortly. We're doing our best to raise those thresholds again. You know, we raised them from $1 million to $2 million a couple of years ago. Costs have gone up. Fewer projects are getting in under that radar. We've got to look at what really is risky and what really is, able to be approved more easily. But what was low cost now in the scheme of the system is no longer low cost, and I think you can expect that bar to rise. That should help. But the other thing you absolutely need, again, a point for the GPS, is you need there to be enough money. So you need those buckets, the ones that you care about, to have enough investment in them, because we can raise the threshold as much as we like, but if there's no money to allocate, then it doesn't matter what the threshold was. Right? Yeah, sure. We passed that through to KiwiRail.
So you have no
We
idea where they
They've got about a $10 billion capital program.
Why then do you give them $1 billion?
Because that is the instruction that the minister gives us by way of the GPS. But from a policy point of view, you could say there is benefit to road users from freight moving on rail. So there is benefit for the land transport system, for the rail network being at a standard that works. That is the policy choice that's being made by ministers, and so we pass it through. We also fill a policy function of advising the minister on the value of Kiwi Rail's capital program, the Rail National Investment Program. So we do have a view about the value of their investment, but it is much broader than just that $1 billion. That's just a revenue pass through.
If that $1 billion spent wisely by yourselves and Kiwi Rail combined together, say to create a land harbour, right?
Sure.
For containers that go from the container truck to
Yep.
the rail.
As an example.
Rail all the way down through the ferry to here.
Yep.
You know, like you take nameplate, we're complaining about the other day, about the ability now to drop trucks down because of the cost of it. But they haven't come up with the idea that, okay, well, I'll put a container on the rail, 4 or 5 containers with main freight written all over them, and then pick them up at the other end. Yeah, well, is that a no-brainer or?
I don't know. I'm not pretending to be a rail expert. I was listening to Kiwi Rail talk about their capital program just last week. It is very large and has many years to run. They are a long way from where they want to be in terms of investment in the rail network. They think they've gotten through the phase of, they wouldn't use the phrase, but let's just call it emergency investment to just get the system holding together and not completely falling apart when you try to use it. But where they aim to be from a point of view that would allow them to be a good commercial operator and lower the costs of rail freight, for example, they've got quite a few years of investment yet to go.
Also taking 60-ton trucks off their roads.
Yep, I absolutely understand. Yeah.
Spending $7 million for anybody.
Yep. There's definitely benefit there.
You know, our biggest problem is that we didn't build the tunnels big enough to put trucks on the rail.
It's a problem. Yeah. There are a few other constraints, but yep.
Quick question, how did you get Kiwi Rail to come to a meeting turn up to your meetings and what have you done?
It can be difficult. I'm not speaking for them because they can and need to speak for themselves. But I do know that they have acknowledged that. At least I've heard them acknowledge it recently, and promise to do better. I can always help. Honestly, I can always try to make connection. I think it's really important to have them in the room when they're being discussed, if it's at all possible. Yep.
Even to get to know the Afford Works program and stuff like that, I think the more that we can share, the more they can share with us, the better we can plan.
So let's just turn to the cycle that we're in now. So let's assume that the government issues a draft government policy statement middle of the year. We're still operating on the existing one until that's finalised early next year. At the same time, the Regional Transport Committee, which is a committee of the Regional Council here in Southland, which meets jointly with the Otago Regional Transport Committee, we will need to, and I am the statutory representative of NZTA on both of those committees, we will need to do the work of writing up the next version of the Southland Regional Land Transport Plan. From your perspective, it's a little more complicated than this, but broadly speaking, that should be a lift of your land transport program into the Regional Land Transport Program, and a lift of every other Southland Council's land transport program, and a lift of the Southland component of our state highway program into the document. Regionally, we rank it, although that has no real statutory bearing. It's something we have to do. But in order to get funding from us, a project or a program has to be in the RLTP. And the RLTP must be consistent with the government policy statement. It's not actually all that hard to be consistent with, but nonetheless, that's the bar. So, we will need to go through as you draft your program and we draft ours, we're sucking them all in at the same time into the Regional Land Transport Program. That has to be achieved, so it has to be consistent with the GPS that, let's say, is finalised March, April next year. That probably doesn't leave a lot of time to finalise an RLTP through public consultation and the usual LGA guidelines in order for that to be submitted to us by the middle of the year, next year. Same time, we've been doing our program, so you do your long-term plan, we do ours. We love acronyms at NZTA, so this acronym's the SHIP, right? We do our investment proposal, our list of projects. We cut it to make sure that it is giving effect to the GPS. You don't have to, in that instance, particularly care about the GPS other than being aware of what money might be available. We have to be giving effect to the GPS because that's our statutory duty. And then we roll up all of the regional land transport programs and then we prioritise it based on what the GPS tells us to do, and we publish the National Land Transport Program. And that has to be published by no later than 1 September next year. We aim to publish it by the middle of the year. We have failed to do that for at least the last two, primarily because actually GPSs have been changing and moving around so much that the tail of the work that is required to then be consistent with it just knocks us all on. But we have always managed at least to meet the statutory deadline, which is 1 September. And that is the stage gate to getting funding from us. If a project isn't in the Regional Land Transport Plan, it can't get into the National Land Transport Plan. If it isn't in the National Land Transport Plan, it can't get funding from the National Land Transport Fund. It can get funding directly from the Crown, and the Crown can pass the money to us. That's a slightly separate discussion, but by and large, that's the way the system works. Right?
So, retrospectively, we can put stuff back into the RLTP, but you have to, if it triggers significance, you'll have to consult, etc. But for and all regional councils, that all RTCs have different sort of barriers. Some of it's a percentage, some of it's a number, whether it triggers significance, and we have to do that. The other thing is that, as James said, that we have to have this declared by the 1st of September, but the first day of the government new year is the 1st of July. And so what we have done in the last two times is we've had an interim funding mechanism where we take a stab at about what will it be, and so carry on as usual, and we'll fix it up later, but it's a tad untidy.
So just leaning into that untidiness for a bit, we will do our best to advise you by the end of this year what we think, broadly speaking, we will be able to budget for you for your transport program next cycle. We will then need to check that against a final GPS, and sometimes, and it was the case last time round, those numbers move around a lot, and that creates quite a bit of heartburn for local government because you've set your budgets. You've gone and consulted your community based on an amount of allocation you thought you were going to get from us. That is a really clear, probably the best clear example of where the two funding systems and the two cycles simply do not mesh up. There are lots of proposals that come surface from time to time for local government to tell us to change it. To be fair, it would require statutory change for it, so it's for ministers to change. But even that, I don't think would really fundamentally change. If you moved our cycle a year earlier, we'd still need to know what was in your program. So there is inevitably going to be a back and forth, and someone is going to be wrong somewhere, and then someone is going to have to amend something that they thought was pretty clear with the community. And that is just an unfortunate truth of marrying the two processes together. Oh, I haven't changed the slide. We are busy working through the update to the funding assistance rates now. So FAR, another acronym, is effectively the most important number you need to know from us. That is our level of subsidy for you. It ranges across the country from 51 to 75. I've got 88 on that slide. 88's the Chatham Islands. Think of that as an outlier, because it really is an outlier in so many ways. But councils receive anywhere from 51% to 75% subsidy from us. largely determined on deprivation of population. We will aim to advise you what your updated FAR is for this next cycle sometime in the next couple of months. It is a critical number for you. We will be very unlikely to change that as things move around next year. The other aspect of funding assistance that you will want to pay very close attention to is any change or suggested change to our emergency works policy. Emergencies are never fun, they are extremely costly, and they are increasingly more frequent. And we are seeing the cost to the land transport system of weather-related emergencies rapidly increase.
Sorry,
No, go Ben.
what's the reasoning behind the review of the FAR rate? Are you talking about a reduction?
No, we simply review it every cycle just to make sure that it is in line with your population, effectively, with the latest stats. That's pretty normal, by the by, but also, hey, sometimes it results in more money to councils, and sure, you'll want to know. Sometimes it results in less money, so you'll want to know. So it's material, but yeah, I noted. I'll take that. Yeah, but emergency works in particular, you really do want to pay attention to. At the moment, the policy is settled. Our board proposed to change the policy fairly substantially 18 months ago, Gordon? About 18 months ago. And local government was really clear that that was something it did not want to contemplate, please. And our board backed off. Our board listened to local government and said, okay, no, fine, we'll keep it as it is. But in not changing that policy, it means our board needs to keep more money back as contingency, and the cost of those works is rising dramatically. Certainly in the last couple of cycles, it is vastly higher than it was prior. So at the moment, a 1 in 10 year event is what is required to qualify. What else, Gordon? What are the other criteria?
Well, the wind is a difficult one because it's hard to prove 1 in 10, but you can generally tell if it looks like an emergency event. It's also, it has to be in excess of $100,000.
That's right.
In total
So more than $100,000 in total
for
cost.
a single event. And it's sort of singular in the geographic event too. You can't have a $50,000 over there and another 70,000 over there.
So
if they're significantly different.
one of the things our board suggested was let's move to a 1 in 20 year event because that lessens the impact on the fund. Fairly obviously, that pushes cost onto local government for the gap. Okay, so we backed off that. We have not changed the policy.
So like a declaration of state of emergency
Oh,
doesn't.
go to Ben. Yeah.
Because the people online.
Oh, sorry. Well, sorry. Apologies.
So when someone asks a question, you'll need to turn your.
Turn yours off.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, Debbie.
Yep.
Yep.
Right, no, thanks, Debbie. So when we have a state of emergency declared, does that automatically set the fund, or is that just somebody declaring a state of emergency?
That is just someone declaring a state of emergency. We'll need proof of the exceedance of the 1 in 10 year event. But the point I'm simply trying to make is the cost of emergencies on the system is rising. Our board must stay solvent. We don't have money that we don't have. We've got debt facilities to manage cash flow issues, but if the cost of emergencies to the system is rising, we simply need to hold more money back in reserve over a 3 year period in order to manage the cost of that. That is absolutely an approach. It's what we're doing right now. If we don't change the policy and push cost elsewhere, the only other option is that the Crown commits to back us up and to pour money in. And in very large events, that is exactly what happens. For the large North Island weather events, that is exactly what happens. The Crown comes in, ministers say, that's great, we'll make good on the fund. We'll take general taxation money and we'll top back up. But that is on a case-by-case, event-by-event basis. And so all I am simply saying is just be aware of that mechanism, be aware of that cost, because you will want to know whether or not the situation changes and whether or not the policy is there. At the moment, though, there is no intent to change the policy. You are covered by the existing emergency works policy.
just ask a question? Just on the FAR rate. So when you were talking about the allocation of funding, you referred very directly about the minister, and then when you started talking about this stuff, it's about the board. So the FAR rate is set by the board, not the minister?
Correct. The FAR rate is set by the board. The board has approved effectively an extension, a continuation of the existing policy. What we are currently working through is simply the mechanics of those numbers. How does that fall out, for example, for Gore District? What number will that produce for you for the next 3-year cycle? We'll publish that and advise you of that, as I say, within a couple of months. But you're right, that is a board decision. The board could alter the FAR policy. As I said, it has chosen not to at this stage. Southland District, for example, because they're neighbours, I might as well reference them. They're very clear they would like to see a change in that. They would like effectively a reversion to what was the policy prior, which would be a removal of the 51% floor, take that lower, because relatively speaking, wealthier councils like Auckland would drop further. They would receive less subsidy, which would axiomatically leave more money available for higher subsidy for other districts. That's their argument there.
Sorry, and just on that, because I think that's where I was leading, is so where was the determination made not to review that policy? Was that like from guidance from Local Government New Zealand, or like, I guess I'm a bit mindful that the councils that have a larger population have a lot more influence to the board, and they're ultimately the ones who are getting the better deal by this in a lot of cases, whereas it's councils like Southland who are worse off. So how was that feedback and decision made, or is that more a question I need to ask the board?
It was a board decision, so it was simply a position taken by the board. You're welcome to write and ask. Be worth doing.
Just one other thing on the FAR reviews is that generally these are like out of the 68 councils, you'll end up with say 6 that change by 1 or maybe 2% sort of thing. It's quite small as a rule, and if we're keeping the same algorithm that we're using, the next iteration will be of that sort of ilk too, I would imagine. So not massive changes. Yeah, and also just with respect to the provision for emergency works, is that has to be made provision for out of the local road operations activity class, and so the bigger and more frequent events that we're having, this just has to be more sliced off the top out of that activity class to adequately make provision, or else we have to rely on the government to chip in, which is that happens, but not. You can't guarantee it. So we have to be aware of how much it is building up, and we have to make provision for it. And so that does restrict the local road operations more.
So, 2027 NLTP, as I say, issued by us no later than 1 September next year. It feels a very long way away, and yet it's not in terms of the amount of work that will be required to pull it all together. We are well on the way. We have a draft SHIP ourselves, so that's our investment proposal for the National State Highway Program. Once we see a draft GPS, we'll do another cut of that, work out what we think is more feasible, and then we will slice and dice that regionally and put that into regional land transport plans. At the same time, you will be building your transport program and your ambitions for particularly the next 3 years. I know it's at 10. There is some question, I might say, about the time period. So at the moment, we operate on a 3-year funding cycle and a 3-year program. The current government policy statement wants us to do work to move that towards a 10-year program, probably a 3-year funding program and a 3-year funding and a 10-year program, so 3 plus 7. That ought to align much better with local governments' programs. I'm hopeful, but we don't yet have the clear certainty from the next GPS that is what the Minister wants us to do. So I can't yet say that it will be a 10-year program.
I just want to check my understanding. So our point of influence from your perspective is to get involved in the GPS now and point them in the direction that we're wanting to see, because by the time what I'm hearing, by the time it gets to this stage, it's often too late to have any influence.
I wouldn't say it's too late to have any influence, but your first point of influence and the most significant influence you can have is the GPS. Think of it as a layer of sieves, right? The most important bit is the catch at the top, right? And if that is too finely grained and simply cuts your ambitions out, it doesn't matter what is happening lower down because you couldn't get through. So the GPS, if you don't pay attention to the GPS, you risk being missed.
And so from your perspective, is there more, have you seen more success from engaging now, pre-election, or waiting till that draft comes out and hitting the new ones? Because I guess efficiency still matters, and time and resourcing.
It's a good point, and it's not like we've all got infinite resources and you can spend your entire time lobbying for change. I think I've seen all sorts of approaches work, to be perfectly honest with you, and it really does depend on how, frankly, they all come together from all different parts, speaking with one voice where you've got common views with other neighbouring councils or other parts of local government. That's great. Being clear and consistent and having ambitions or desires that you've been arguing for a long time also help. I'm well versed, for example, on Mataura level crossing. I know it. It's great. I understand the issue. We understand the issue, and the minister does too, and that helps when they're framing things up. I think if you've got just a few points of influence on the GPS. There is a draft being written now that can presumably be influenced in some level. Even if you ignore that, there will be consultation on that public draft once it is published, middle of the year-ish. That's formal consultation undertaken by the Ministry of Transport. That's probably an essential point to submit on. If I think about what happened last time in terms of the cycle, that version of the draft was countered by alternate versions from other political parties at the time as effectively manifesto commitments. And when the government changed, that caused the swing between the draft and the update post-election. So it is entirely up to you. I am not going to advise you on the politics of lobbying, but to be clear, that is the mechanism that is followed in the past. So you probably want to pay attention to what others are committing to in transport, right? That is why you will need an updated GPS draft post-election. And it is always worth remaining in dialogue with the minister of some form about whether the system is delivering for you or not. That's part of his role, part of your role. I can see a question.
So from what you're saying, just following on from what Tyrone's been asking, is it the position of our councillors that are on the regional transport committee to advocate for that, or is it for the likes of our mayors, local mayors, mayors task force, mayoral forum to be pushing that to ministers? Like, as councillors, we can be out there going, give us more money to fix our roads because our roads are really bad, but we've got heaps of trucks on them. What direction is the best point of call to make as much noise, is what I'm asking.
I'd leave that judgment entirely to you, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think you've named a number of places where they have points of influence. They're all worth considering, but to the point earlier, you've got limited resources. You'll have to prioritise where you think influence can best be served. As I say, I've seen all sorts work. I'm merely the instrument at the end of the chain in terms of government policy. I'll let you make the judgment about where is best to influence.
The answer is probably all of them. We've advocated at Mayoral Forum for the far rate, and that's a regional effort, even though probably for us we're relatively happy with where the far rate is. I mean, we'd always like more, but we probably don't want to piss people off and get less. Same with, it's obvious that if the minister knows about the Mataura Railway crossing, it's because of the advocacy that we've done, and John being on that committee as well are constantly advocating for issues here. It's just, as James has said, there's so many competing priorities. Every other council around the country should and is doing this sort of advocacy. So you've just got to be the loudest and the most persistent, which we're pretty good at doing, to be fair.
So one other point I'd like to say is too is that a unified response is quite powerful, because definitely with the emergency works changes being proposed, I think the joined up noise of council coming back against it, they did change their mind, which was, I thought, reasonably surprising from my point of view.
Yep, and it is also with moving on, further onto the slide, worth understanding that just the scale of request. So it's one thing to be clear that something is important to you, and that's great. You need to be. That is partly your role, and certainly serving your community. But let me just point out that bottom bullet on the slide there. So we are being asked to fund dramatically more work in the land transport system than there is money to fund. There are always going to be trade-offs. There are always going to be projects that cannot be funded. That is not me saying don't ask, but it is just be aware that everyone else is asking too. And so it is, to the mayor's point, a question of thinking about how to be most effective in that, because there's a lot of request in the system. Sorry? Yep. Yep. So there's a brief rundown of the dates ahead of us in the current system. As I say, we should be well into giving you draft advice in the second half of the year. Don't worry about most of the acronyms on there. The point is, we will form up our advice based on the current GPS. We will update that when we have a draft GPS. We will update that when we have a new draft GPS. We will just keep, and it will require a degree of agility. There is always a lot of work to be done to make sure that programs are lined up about this time next year. And depending on the amount of swing between the GPS that we've got today and the GPS we end up with then, it can be a lot of work or it can be a little amount of work, but it is a critical amount of work. As I say, you will have at least draft numbers to drop into your budgets by the end of the year.
So just one comment about the third last bullet put in October. By the time we have our GPS, we developed the IPM, the investment prioritisation method. It's not a great read, but I'd suggest having a really good read of it and just seeing what actually can make work for you guys, and tell us. I don't want to say tell us what we want to hear, but tell us what we want to hear. But back it up with that, saying that that we are a medium for this, and therefore, because that will just make a much easier convo to be able to get money.
So to be clear, the IPM, the investment prioritisation method, is simply our way of ranking projects against their delivery on the GPS. Yeah, to give effect to it. Councillor.
But on that, and you said there before, 3 years ago, you had your draft GPS, and then you had a manifesto, we had a government change, and then you had a policy change right in that. So in all reality, that draft you were doing in October might be null and void in November.
It might be, but that's the system we have. I can't do anything about that. it's worth pointing out. You're absolutely right, but there isn't a lot we can do about it. We are constrained with the way we're constrained.
Just with the fuel crisis, petrol tax, petrol consumption's going down, and so income goes down. How are we going to fix that?
Well spotted. You're absolutely right. So two things there worth pointing out. One, this government policy statement, committed is probably about as far as I can go. Let's use the word committed. Committed to future increases in fuel excise duty and road user charges from 1 January next year. Those are not legislated for. Ministers have been quite clear in the current environment that is very unlikely to occur. So that reduces forward revenue into the fund. If they don't occur, that's fine, I understand. And you're absolutely right, activity on the transport network is also dropping as a response to price. that reduces the income into the system in real time, right? So our projection for this current 3-year funding cycle is just a projection based on activity, and we monitor that on a very, very live basis. And as activity drops, we will need to adjust our spending in real time. We don't yet have a concrete read on what the impact is right now. As soon as we do, we will advise local government, because it absolutely has an impact on you too. It may impact that question that came up right earlier about whether there is available funding in year 3 for other things that didn't quite cross the line earlier, because some things have slowed down, because overall revenue simply shrunk, and therefore there is just less to hand out. So you're right to raise it, you're right to be aware of it. I can't today tell you what the impact so far has been or what we predict the impact to be, but we are watching it. And as soon as we've got a clear steer on it, we'll tell you. In past situations where that happened, like for example in COVID when we went into lockdown, which was an extreme drop in activity and therefore revenue, the Crown turned and made good, right, in order to make sure that activity in the infrastructure space did not drop. But that is a matter for Crown, probably on advice once we understand the impact, and as I say, it's still yet too early to understand that impact.
A little bit off centre, but in your opinion, has the quality of the bitumen that we put on our roads dropped since the closing of Marsden Point? Oops, sorry.
No. It's a good question, but we monitor bitumen quality quite rigorously for that exact reason, because we are now a bitumen importer. If you're interested, I'm sure I can source you the documents that look at bitumen quality. I'm not an expert, but I have to take it on the reports that are written. No, we're satisfied with the quality of bitumen that's entering the country.
So it's as good as it was?
That's my understanding, yeah. Yep.
Just around that, it's not to say that when the end contractor gets it, they add diesel to it to help it flow better. So depending on what quantities they add, that can also affect the bleed through rate on the years afterwards as well. So that will affect the end product. So it may come into the country meeting ISO standards, but then it's what happens after it gets to the contractor.
Can we just, sorry councillors, we're 2 minutes over, so we've got a couple more slides to go, so if we could whip through those, that would be grand, thank you.
Not a problem. Yep, two to go. I'm sorry for keeping you. Oh, no, 2 to go. I did just want to flag our own state highway maintenance, just to be clear. So I referred to the amount of investment that is heading into pavement condition and the increased investment, the change in policy to reverse the slide that is occurring in pavement condition. In response to that, we have fundamentally altered our maintenance contracts nationwide. We have aligned them all, we've let them, and they all begin, the new maintenance contracts all begin on 1 May. It means we are bringing in-house, for what it is worth, we're bringing in-house more of the expertise about what maintenance is done on the state highway. In the past, the contracting arrangement actually left a lot of that decision to the maintenance contractor themselves. Here in Southland, South Roads remains the maintenance contractor, so they were the prior contractor under the old arrangement. They will be the contractor from 1 May. There have been some changes elsewhere. But we are deliberately structuring those maintenance contractors to produce separable portions that we can take to market, that we can farm out to Tier 3, to other contractors to try to grow the health of the contracting system. It is too light, it is too anemic, and it rests too much on the shoulders of a few Tier 1 contractors across the country. That should provide some interest and support to local contractors. If you're interested, I'm happy to show you more at a time. And I did just want to mention speed. One of the other things that changed dramatically with the change in government last election was a change to the speed setting rule, which is written by the minister and the ministry but administered by ourselves as the regulator. So we don't write it, but we administer it, including on ourselves as the state highway operator. The big thing that you may have seen in the past 2 years is the big program of work that rule required us to revert speeds that had lowered on the state highway back up to a higher operating speed. We are now through that piece of work, and we are now slowly working our way through quite a lengthy list of communities, a lot of them small, local rural communities severed by state highways, where they would like to see a reduction in speed of the state highway. That is possible under the rule. The rule has quite a process to go through in order to validate whether that is possible or not, but it is possible. You may see us out publicly consulting where we are working with those communities. If there are such communities in Gore, you are more than welcome to be in touch. We'll add them to our list. We'll work with you on the rule. As I say, it's quite onerous and quite controlling in terms of the process. It takes quite a lot of work, but we are now at that point where we can contemplate working with communities to get an acceptable speed on the state highway where those are perhaps misaligned. So I did want to make sure that I raised that with you. And that's me. Oh, sorry.
I literally have at the top of my list speed into Matoda. Coming south into Matara, it's 100 k's. You hit the 50k sign. It's a main road. It's just hideous for our residents that live along that stretch. Definitely keen to carry on that conversation.
Consider it on the list. Anything else before I let you get back on time? Sorry.
Just speed limit changes along some of our local roads like Reby Road. Are we able to, we're able to make those changes?
As long as they comply with the rule. So you're welcome to seek advice from us about what is allowed in the rule. The rule makes it very difficult to get lower operating speeds. Those lower 30 operating speeds in particular are quite hard to achieve under this rule now. But other speed changes, they ought to be able to be worked through. You need to justify them. Happy to provide your connection and advice.
Okay, I think we've been told in the past no, so it'd be good to rework that. Yeah, no, that's cool. If there's nothing else, thank you very much for making the time today. I really appreciate you coming in, and thank you very much. The next workshop is closed, but then we'll be back at 4 o'clock for another public session as well. Thank you. We'll switch over to Polis.